prime thing is you have to win.
Ill intent, violence, physicality, pain. Enough is enough.
That's
All right,
the old intro again? I'm sorry.
Welcome back to the Just Win podcast. It's been a little while. It's been an interesting news cycle, even though technically nothing's supposed to be happening yet. But we have fights at Starbucks. We have squashed QB rumors. We have draft prospects talking. I'm back home from the combine. I'm back in the Bay Area, but Tashan Reed and Vic Tafur are still out there in the combine and the wild west, apparently, just getting scoops for you guys, fighting till 2 a.m. out there. I do not envy you guys.
Yeah, don't envy me either. I'm ready to go home, but here we are. It's been a productive week.
Loving it. Let's go. I'm ready for another 5 days. Let's go.
Yeah, I got
sick. Be on your own with that one, but
I got sick towards the end of Japan. Didn't have a chance to recover. Went straight to the combine. Stayed out till 2 a.m. But I'm back early. I had to tap out early. But you guys are still there. Anything interesting happening in Indianapolis?
I think the story of the day, obviously, story of the week was the Raiders, and the Giants exploring trading for Rams quarterback Matthew Stafford, but he reached a deal today to remain put in Los Angeles. And I think, it's kind of always how we expected that this would resolve. Not necessarily a surprise. I think, the Raiders and Giants were more so doing their due diligence. I mean, anytime a top 10 quarterback is potentially available and you need a quarterback, you should probably make a call. But I just never really believed that the Rams were actually going to trade Matthew Stafford. It just didn't make sense. It's not like they have a starter ready to go to replace someone already on the roster. They don't have a high draft pick. The other options out there aren't particularly attractive. So I think it was an expected, resolution, but nonetheless one that has to be disappointing for Raiders fans.
There was a window there. I think it was maybe yesterday for maybe 8 hours where I thought the Raiders might get him. I think, you heard of his wife, Kelly Stafford, went on a podcast. She was upset about things. She kind of calls the shots from everything I've heard. And so, and it's going to be a lot of money. I think a difference. We haven't heard the terms yet about the new deal with the Rams, but I think it's going to be a substantial difference. I think the Raiders are offering like 2 years for like $100 million. And the Giants were offering even more, but I'm not sure the Giants were ever really a factor because I think moving to New York would have been such a bigger deal than moving to Vegas would have been for the Stafford. So I thought, yeah, I think the Rams definitely worked hard the last few days talking to Stafford, kind of getting him on the same page. And I'm really curious to hear the money, but at the end, he's 37. I guess staying put and not uprooting his family was a big deal. And they're out there. They're a good team. I think, though, you probably could argue that what Tom Brady's case was, hey, if we get you, and our defense will be back. We'll get some other high-priced guys for agency, top draft pick. We're going to be good also. So I can see where Tom was selling that to Matt. But and there's the whole skiing thing. If there's pampering or whatever, I don't know. But yeah, so I thought there was a window. I thought for a second I thought maybe it might happen. But like you said, the team that has the guy usually keeps him if he's a top 10, top 15 quarterback, and that's the case here.
Yeah, listening to our own Jordan Rodriguez about the whole situation, it seems like Matthew Stafford and the Rams have been at kind of odds with his contract situation for a while. So it's not something that just started brewing up this season. It's been an ongoing conversation. Obviously, Stafford wants to get paid like a top quarterback, and I think the Rams know that they have a certain amount of leverage, knowing that this is the best place for Matthew Stafford with the coaching staff and the pieces around him, and just not wanting to move at his age. I mean, it's kind of a weird situation to even consider that Matthew Stafford would be on the move as well as he's played at his age to kind of uproot that situation. And also the Rams are at kind of a place where they're going to have to pay a bunch of young players. So there was a possibility of at least trying to get some assets for an older player like Matthew Stafford before he falls off the cliff or he retires. But ultimately, like you guys said, what happened is expected. I mean, it just didn't seem like it would make a lot of sense to move Stafford for the Rams, and it didn't make a lot of sense for Stafford to move into a more volatile situation at his age. And it seems like, again, kind of like the Ben Johnson situation, where the top candidate or top hottest person in that position might have kind of used the Raiders for leverage a little bit, or at least used them to get kind of a gauge of his value elsewhere, which seemed like the talking point for the Rams this entire time, is just to gauge his value outside of the Rams and then come back to him and get a deal done. And that seems like what happened.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think people like make a little bit too much of that stuff. Like, like in free agency, for example, like if a top free agent hits the market, there's going to be like 6 teams that try to sign him. Like, it's anything, teams get used as leverage to drive up the price like everybody else. So I don't know. People kind of like, get mad at the player or the team for doing that, but it's pretty normal stuff. So I don't really think it really matters too much. But I think more so the bigger takeaway for the Raiders is I think it shows, what Pete Carroll's been saying since his introductory press conference about them being so urgent about trying to compete this year. Like, I mean, if you're going to try and trade for a 37-year-old top 10 quarterback and pay him, 40, $50 million per year, that means you think that you can compete like as soon as this year. And like every coach and GM is going to say that, like the Raiders said that last year, but then they basically didn't do anything in free agency or through the trade market to really try to inject the roster with the type of talent that they would need to compete right away. But it's clear, I mean, obviously free agency hasn't even gotten here yet, and the draft is still a couple months away, but the Raiders are going to be aggressive when it comes to trying to improve this roster in short order and compete right away. And so even though they fell short in the Stafford sweepstakes, I think for Raiders fans, that should probably be the primary takeaway is they are actually going for it, because if they weren't, they wouldn't have tried to make a move like this one.
Yeah, I agree. I think Brady's 0 for 2 now with Ben Johnson and with Matt Stafford, but clearly the money was not going to be a factor. The money was not going to be the reason why they didn't get these guys. So I think that's where in the past it might have been with the Raiders. So I think that's definitely a very positive takeaway. And the negative takeaway is this was the best quarterback available, I think, in terms of free agency or the draft or whatever. And if you wanted to have a chance to have an impact this year and make a big turnaround from 4 wins to say 10. He would have been a big part of that. So now, we've reported that they're not super high in Sam Darnold, but now you have to go back and look at what's out there and the options. Maybe, Sam Darnold and Russell Wilson are back in the mix. Maybe, you think about trading to number 1 for Cam Ward. I mean, there's a lot of things you got to consider now when your first option, your first path didn't get you where you wanted to go. So I think, there's plenty of time. It's early. So if they had gotten this done, it would have been a nice thing to kind of get them going, in terms of their whole offseason plan. But there's still plenty of time to figure out what they want to do. They have plenty of money. So a lot of heads put their heads together and figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting that the Raiders kind of eject themselves into the conversation as far as these top, candidates and players go, because the Raiders have been volatile. They haven't been a winning team, but anytime there are these conversations like with Ben Johnson and Stafford, the Raiders are all of a sudden in a mix, and you wouldn't think that. And I think part of that is Tom Brady, and part of that is their willingness to spend money. So that is a good sign. But again, like, I think the reality is just that the Raiders just aren't a super stable situation right now, but they're selling the dream, and it's at least registering in the minds of people. But right now, I think they're gonna be a team that kind of lands with that second class of whatever they're looking for right now. They might not be that team that always gets the top dog yet, until they could prove a little bit more stability. But I think they're selling the dream at the very least.
And what did Wayne Gretzky say? I mean, you miss every shot you don't take. So I mean, you might as well go for it. What's the worst they're going to say? No. I mean, so. But it's year one of the regime. Like, it's not that much pressure. Like, I don't think these guys are going to be in jeopardy or anything if they don't have the best season this year. But like right now, they're basically selling, whether it's coaches, players, executives, different versions of recruiting that they've been doing this offseason, is you're kind of trying to pitch people on it being a blank canvas. Like, we can do whatever because we have almost $100 million in cap space and we have a 6 overall pick and all this stuff. But like, it's not actually tangible outside of like a few players on the roster, like Brock Bowers, Christian Wilkins, and Max Crosby. And there's some other solid players. I'm not saying those are only good players on the roster, but there's a lot of question marks. And so you just have to, start building it. After free agency, after the draft, so some of those holes will, you would think be filled. They're not going to hit on every single big signing or every single draft pick, but the roster should be in a better place, ahead of the start of next season. And so they go out and, start to put something competitive together and look competent this season that can set them up to maybe make a big splash, at quarterback or, another premium position, or maybe a player that wouldn't have otherwise come here when you get to next year. And again, I know everybody wants to win right away. It's been a long time since the Raiders have won a playoff game, but you can't do everything in 1 year. The Washington Commanders going from basically worst to first, like that doesn't really happen that often. Even the Lions, like it wasn't an immediate thing. Like it took like 2 or 3 years for them to start to show progress. And so I think people have to be a little bit patient. And so the Raiders are obviously being aggressive, but they can't be reckless and just do things just to say that they did it. Just because you pay a quarterback $40 million doesn't mean he's going to be good. Like, when you're talking about Sam Darnold, like he might be terrible next year. And then what? So I think it has to be you kind of have to balance it. And we'll see how they do once free agency can start.
They clearly
Yeah,
want to make a
and
big move. Though. They clearly want to do one. I think, and you'll see one at some point soon. They're 0 for 2, but I guess you could say 0 for 3 because I think Trey Smith was a guy they're looking at. Now the Chiefs are going to tag him. He'll stay with the Chiefs, but that would have been a huge free agent signing to kind of bolster your offensive line and hurt your division champ. So, but I do agree that they are going to make a big move, and I hear you saying about being reckless and that they're trying to build a roster and win now. I think part of that will be the kind of create some shockwaves with some moves here in free agency.
yeah, it seems pretty obvious. Even if they do draft a quarterback at 6, they are going to bring in a veteran. Whether they decide they're going to start the veteran, because Tom Brady has been pretty vocal about sitting rookie quarterbacks. They're going to bring in a veteran, and maybe that veteran ends up starting for a year and mentoring the rookie, or that veteran just gives them a best chance to win. So the options left, Sam Darnold is the top option. Obviously played very well throughout the entire year and flamed out the last 2 games in a spectacular fashion. But if you look at the overall sample size, he was a very good quarterback for most of the year. And he's still young too. So there's still potential for him to grow and maybe learn from those games that he flamed out towards the end. And then you look at the Steelers quarterbacks, or former Steeler quarterbacks, Justin Field and Russell Wilson. Obviously, Justin Fields is young and showed some progress early in the year when he was starting. Russell Wilson came in and improved the offense for a little bit, and then sort of just regressed back to just the old Russell that's kind of over the hill that we've seen, but he does provide some stability. Any other veteran options you guys are looking at? Aaron Rodgers, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, Aaron Rodgers
talked
is
about. Go ahead.
good.
I was going
I was
Rodgers.
gonna say, our Diana Rossini at the Athletic, she reported that the Giants are pushing pretty hard to try to get Rodgers, so we'll see what happens there. But I don't know. It's kind of hard to see that happening because I would assume that Aaron Rodgers wants to reunite with Devontae Adams, and I don't see Devontae Adams coming back to the Raiders. So he's still on the Jets, but both of them are technically still on the Jets, but I don't think they're going to be by the time we get to free agency. So I don't really think that one's realistic, but also just in general. And we reported this earlier today, like the Raiders, it doesn't mean that they won't ultimately, decide to do something if they fall in love with Sam Darnold or something, but the expectation is that they probably won't make a big financial commitment to another veteran quarterback. They were prepared to do that for Matthew Stafford, but the perception is that there's a pretty big gap between Matthew Stafford and whoever you consider to be the second best veteran quarterback available on the market. And so they're not going to force it. I think they'll do their due diligence, see what the market is for those guys. Like maybe Sam Darnold's market isn't $40 million a year. Maybe it's, I don't know, 20 something or closer to 30 or whatever it ends up being. And then you think about it a little bit more. But we'll see how it plays out. Like if you had to predict it, I guess at the veteran spot, I think it's more likely they sign a kind of like a 1-year prove it deal for a stopgap option. Maybe that's Justin Fields. Maybe that's, probably not Russell Wilson, but somebody else that's in that 1-year deal kind of market. But they're going to explore all the options because they have to, because the quarterbacks are Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell.
I was gonna say with Rodgers, I think when the stuff with the Rams picking up heat as far as maybe they move on from Stafford, I think that was the name that was coming up a lot was Aaron Rodgers, and his price tag maybe half of what Stafford's is, maybe like 25 million a year. So again, I know he has a lot of baggage, but 25 million a year, maybe it's worth a team taking a shot at him. I think the Giants, like you said, are looking at him, but to me, it's a stopgap option. So I'm not sure that really. Like the Raiders want someone with a little more, maybe a couple of years, help them bridge the gap if they draft a guy this year or next year. But yeah, so I think there's not a super exciting guy in the market. So I think it's going to be like talked about. It requires some creativity, maybe a couple of guys. So you pair a young guy with the old guy, and you hope for the best.
Yeah, I cannot see a world where Chip Kelly and Aaron Rodgers make it for a year together.
Yeah, they can. I don't think. And I wonder if Tom Brady really likes Aaron Rodgers in that way as a guy. I mean, I think you could definitely see where the Brady Stafford thing made sense, but I think Rodgers is a different animal. So, but we'll see.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into the rookie quarterbacks. What are our early impressions of the rookie quarterbacks? To me, and I'm not done with my study yet. I'm probably like halfway through the top quarterbacks, but Cam Ward obviously is a top quarterback to me. I mean, I don't think it's close right now as far as being first round worthy and top 10 worthy. And Shadir, I'm having trouble with Shadir, man. Like, I don't know. Like, are we talking about him as a first round quarterback if his name isn't Sanders? Like, what makes him a first round quarterback besides confidence and his name?
I mean, I don't know. I think he played pretty good football the last couple of years. I don't know if it's just he's
I
confident
mean,
as a
sure. I mean, like,
name.
we've seen
You mean
quarterbacks
like
with
his
very similar
traits is what
numbers
you
get
mean,
drafted in the
or
draft
do you
too.
mean production or traits?
Production and traits. I mean, if you're looking at
That's what I
production,
mean.
like there's quarterbacks that have produced more than him that gets drafted in late in the mid rounds too.
Yeah, but I don't think it's like he was like Josh Allen at Wyoming or something. You know what I mean? Passed for 4,000 yards, 37 touchdowns, 10 picks. Like, I think his production, at Colorado was pretty good. I do agree with you that he doesn't have like a special trait. It's not like he has a crazy arm. He's not super fast. He's not like a 6'5", 255-pound guy or something like that. But I don't think you necessarily have to have that to be like a good starting NFL quarterback. And I'm not saying he's as good as this guy, but like coming out, I think people had pretty similar things to say about like a Joe Burrow type. Like he doesn't really have any individual physical
Well,
trait that the guy would be
Joe
like, oh my
Burrow's,
God, he's amazing.
I mean, Joe Burrow's 6'5", and he made SEC defenders look bad when he ran. Like he was a
Yeah.
really good athlete coming out.
Yeah.
Shadir not close to that type of athlete
Yeah, I'm not
without that.
saying he's as good as Joe Burrow. I'm just saying like we've heard or we've seen quarterbacks that don't necessarily have those dynamic athletic traits like be good quarterbacks. So I think like it's a fair critique and something that I think makes you question what his ceiling could be at the next level, but I don't think it like prevents him from potentially being a good starting quarterback in the NFL. But when it comes to like how the Raiders feel about these guys, we'll have more in a little bit here. We're working on a story about what we're hearing about the NFL Combine and the Raiders position, so we don't want to give away too much, but I think the Raiders, as much as they value physical traits, a lot of what they're looking for in their quarterback is the mental side of it. How do they process things? Are they able to read defenses? How do they grasp NFL level concepts? Really the kind of the ins and outs of playing quarterback from a mental perspective, which is what something like Tom Brady, that was his superpower. That's what he was exceptional at. Obviously, he had a ton of great size and he had a better arm than people give him credit for, but that was how Tom Brady remained a great quarterback well into his 40s. And so it makes sense that he would look for those things in quarterbacks that he's considering. And so that's what the Raiders and John Spytek said this when he talked on Tuesday. When it comes to these meetings that they have for the quarterbacks this week, this was their first time meeting with them. That's what they were really drilled in on. And so I think that's going to be those traits are what they're going to be looking at, pretty prominently, not just this week at the combine, but moving forward with the pro days and the top 30 visits to come.
On that note, I'd say we both heard that Jalen Milroe did really well as far as interviews go and being on the board, telling about how he sees things and and the pre and post snap reads. I think he's a guy who really stood out, not just with the Raiders, but also other teams from what I heard this week. So we've talked in the past about him being a guy who, is going to take a while. I mean, he's definitely, I think we may have the highest ceiling, but it might get take a while to get there. But he's a guy who can, run the ball, and he has, the throwing is not great at this point, but he has made some throws. And I just think that in terms of the leadership and the stuff on the field and in the helmet, it looks like it was a good week for him this week so far.
Yeah, and also good things about Texas quarterback Quinn Ewers. A lot of similar things when it came to how he performed in meetings. He's a guy that he's had a lot of ebbs and flows throughout his college career. He was once talked about as like a number one overall pick type, and now he's almost certainly going to be a day two guy. Second, third round at some point, maybe even later than that, depending on how certain teams feel about him. But he was a guy that he's really of guys that do have good physical traits. Like he has a pretty electric arm. He's a smaller guy in terms of his build, but his arm is pretty special. And he also did pretty well when it came to, some of those things that you were saying that Milroe stood out at.
Yeah, and my thing is like if you are betting on Shadur, that's what you're betting. You're betting that his mental side of the game is so good that it's going to overcome a lot of physical deficiencies to turn him into an elite quarterback. I think there is a floor with Shadur. I don't think he's gonna be a bad quarterback, but I mean, like if you just take out the name, you have a quarterback that's athletic, but not that athletic. Yeah, very weak arm. I mean, I was surprised how weak his arm is watching the film, and he's accurate, but it's not like special accuracy like Joe Burrow or anything like that. And again, like Joe Burrow is probably the best comp for him, but then Joe Burrow is also 6'5", has amazing, like elite level accuracy, and his arm is stronger than Shadur's too. So if you're just looking at the traits without the name, and yeah, he has some production, but yeah, there's a lot of productive quarterbacks in college that end up getting drafted in the mid rounds because they don't have the traits too. So the bet is that he's going to be so smart. He's going to be like a Tom Brady level type of quarterback because that's what's going to take him to be that elite type of player. So to me, I don't know. I'm struggling putting him in the first round. But again, I still have some games to go. I'm about like 5-6 games in. We'll see if I can get myself there at the end. But I mean, the second.
He's going to get drafted in the first round.
I mean, we can hear your struggle. We hear your struggle. It's coming through. We're definitely.
Yeah, he's going to go in the first round. It's just a matter of who takes him. But
Yeah, but I mean, I guarantee you, there's going to be some teams that don't have him in the first round too. But again, it only takes one or two teams, whatever it is. But I guarantee you, there will be teams that don't have him in the first round. But the second class of quarterbacks, Jason Dart, Will Howard. Are we hearing about any Raider interest in those guys?
I mean, Milroe and Ewers, the guys that Vic and I just highlighted, were kind of the guys that I think stood out among that group. The Raiders, they did meet with Dart. They did. I don't believe they met with Will Howard. It might just be a product of Chip Kelly coaching him for the past year and knowing him very well. And also, they still have the pro days and top 30 visits, which is when they bring players to the facility in Henderson. For people that don't know, you're able to bring up to 30 players on those visits before the draft, and that's when they'll be able to have those in-person meetings with the guys inside the building. So it's still early in the process. They haven't made any final decisions on guys, but I do think there's some guys of intrigue in that second group to where if the Raiders draft somebody else or another position in the first round, they could potentially draft a quarterback in the second round, third round, or maybe even later in the draft that they believe could potentially compete for a starting role as soon as their rookie season.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about what you guys learned from John Spytek and Pete Carroll during their media availability on Tuesday. It looked like they talked in depth about their plans. What did you guys learn?
Not much. It was a lot of generalist talk, and they kind of. I mean, even Spytek said he was going to dance around a little bit some of the questions, and it's early. I mean, like Pete said, they're still kind of going full speed, trying to get everything. They got the staff together, looking at the early, scouting reports, and kind of get as much of the free agency list. And Pete said they want to re-sign all their defensive free agents. They have like 8 guys who started last year who are free agents. I mean, I'm sure that was a little bit of exaggeration, but clearly they brought Patrick Graham back. They signed Polomal already, so they want to definitely bring some of those guys back, keep that core, and hopefully that the potential they saw in camp last year comes through this year. So I think That's probably the biggest takeaway from those things. And that, they're not. There's no strict policy of drafting the best talent available or reaching for need. They're going to try and do whatever they feel is best at the time. But clearly, you don't want to reach, and that's a clear thing. You want to get a guy who fits, and it was I think John said, it's a good human being that with good work habits, and a guy who you think will respects the game and will respect being a part of your team.
Yeah, I mean, biggest takeaway from Carroll was that the Seahawks media really misses him. That's pretty clear.
Yeah, that
Got
was
like
something else.
1,000 questions. But
They love.
I think good.
No, good.
I was gonna say, we'll say earlier in terms of like, the sense of urgency being there for them wanting to compete right away. That was drilled home by both of them. We got a little bit more insight on Tom Brady's influence as a minority owner. Like, I don't know. I think people have gone like a little bit too crazy with like the Brady stuff. Like he's not like there every day or like calling every single transaction, every single player the Raiders sign or draft. Tom Brady did this, Tom Brady did that. Like it's not like that. Like he's essentially like a high level advisor that chimes in on the big shit in like the general direction of the team. Like he's not sitting here signing Isaiah pull him out to a 2-year extension. Shouts to him, he's a good player, but like it's not that granular. And I think that was something that I pulled away was Spytek and Carroll are autonomous beings. They're not just Brady's puppets doing his bidding out there within the Raiders building. And so and I think something else kind of on something that Ted will really enjoy is the Raiders are investing a lot more in their analytics department. I think the longest answer Spytek probably gave us was about Mark Hughes, who is an executive that they brought over from the Broncos. He did a lot of stuff with the Broncos, but he also helped get their analytics department off the ground, however many years ago when they started doing that. And that's essentially what he's going to do with the Raiders. Their new ownership has helped them recognize they have some Silicon Valley tech guys involved now who recognize the value of that kind of stuff and have some relationships in that space. And so they're going to build out that department a lot. And Carroll, he mentioned that. I think he said that was his biggest takeaway during his year away from coaching was, the value of analytics and looking at the game from a different perspective. And so it's a very broad term, and that includes a lot of things. But like obviously, the one that's the most visible on game days is game management. Timeout usage, challenge usage, fourth down decision making, things that the Raiders, I would say, their last 3 head coaches, Gruden, McDaniels, and Pierce, all weren't great at, in my opinion. And maybe even further back than that before I was on the beat. But that's something that it seems like they're really putting a lot of money into, trying to correct moving forward.
Yeah, I saw that they moved on from their old game management expert. I mean, I guess he would have to based on, and it's probably not all his fault. I mean, Antonio Pierce probably didn't listen to him a lot, or there was some sort of lag in communication. But they and a lot of teams too. This is a big theme this offseason is game management and who's helping the head coach with that and just building out that department. And it's a thing teams are really focused on. I mean, these games are so close now that all these decisions matter. Like you don't want to lose a game because you don't know how to use a timeout or you burned a timeout too early. There's just too much effort, too much time. It gets put in these games for it to get blown because of a bad decision in that department. So it looks like the Raiders are, like many teams, just trying to get better in that department. But let's talk about some of the Raiders' other needs besides quarterback. What do you guys see as the Raiders' top needs other than quarterback?
Pretty much everything besides tight end, I guess. But no, I mean, I
Yeah, you
think
can't
they have
draft
more
a tight
off.
end by
Yeah,
3 years in a
yeah,
row.
yeah. I think
Even though
that's
it's
done with. They have more, that I think Vic mentioned earlier. Carroll, mentioned really wanting to bring back a lot of the starters on defense and free agency that are set to test the market. And if they do that, I think it's pretty clear. Like most of the needs are on the offensive side of the ball in terms of glaring ones. They need a starting caliber running back, a number one receiver, and I would say guard on the offensive line is the position that stands out the most. Like they could potentially seek an upgrade at right tackle, but I would say guard really is the bigger need in my opinion. And so I would say those 3 positions stand out to me on offense. And then positions on defense, again, it kind of depends which guys they end up bringing back or not. Like if they lose Trayvon Merrick, I think safety becomes a major one. But so I think that it's kind of hard to say on defense until we see how free agency plays out. And so I kind of focus on those offensive positions.
Yeah, I think we touched on in the article that Tashan teased a little bit, but I think the new regime does not really view Jacoby Myers as number one guy. I think that they like him and everything, but I think they clearly want a number one guy, a guy who can make the big plays, stretch the field a little bit. I think there's a lot of guys in the draft this year who can do that, and there's some guys that are definitely free agency. So I think that'll be a big thing they hit on as number one receiver. I think the other spots besides what he mentioned were maybe like a linebacker, a safety type, a guy who can can thump and also can drop back and coverage and dime. And I think those guys are something they did a good job in Tampa finding those kind of guys. So I think they'll try and do that again. The guy, young guy, they can kind of build around in that role.
Yeah. And as far, I think upgrading the offensive line, I think it's a big deal. I mean, you just look at the top teams in the playoffs last year and how physical they were up front, and what happened with the Kansas City Chiefs and how they were overmatched on the offensive line. I just think with the way the league is moving, defense is getting smaller, defense is playing more too deep, light boxes. Getting an advantage on the offensive line gives you a huge leg up in this modern day and age. So don't be okay with a okay offensive line or one that doesn't have a major weakness. I think you should be greedy as far as trying to upgrade the offensive line and turning that into a weapon. And as far as the draft class, what do you guys think the Raiders should prioritize with that sixth pick?
Well, I think, for on one end, we'll kind of see if they end up staying put at 6. I think it's possible they could explore trading up higher in the first round, which would, be for a quarterback, as Vic alluded to earlier. And they could also decide to trade down if they don't like, or let's say they like a collection of players at 6 and feel comfortable trading down to, let's say, 9 or 10 and picking up some extra draft capital. So we'll see where they end up picking. But I do think it's going to be that, I know it's cliche, but that best player available approach. I think pretty much anything, like I said, besides tight end is going to be on the table. But for me, if it's not a quarterback, I'd be looking towards the trenches. I think that's really, like you said, that was the key for the Eagles in that Super Bowl win. And John Spytek mentioned the Eagles about 50,000 times on Tuesday. So it's clear they want to try to replicate what they did a little bit. And so maybe that's Mason Graham from Michigan. Maybe that's Abdul Carter from Penn State. Maybe it's Will Campbell on the offensive side of the ball. Or some other maybe edge rushers that might be in that range. So that's where I would lean towards. It's kind of hard to say just because there's 5 teams picking ahead of the Raiders, like who was going to be among that group. But I'd be looking on trenches really on either side of the ball.
I
Well,
agree. I think there's like I think we discussed this in the past where I think there's like 6 or 7 elite players in this draft. So I think you're in a good spot to get a guy who can come in and be a day one difference maker. And if you do want to trade down and get more picks, you can hit some of your needs. Like this is a safety from Georgia we talked about before. And I think this thing, the one that you hear these things and you don't know if it's buzz or it's just noise, but you hear that all of a sudden McMillan, the receiver out of Arizona, maybe falling a little bit out of the top 10. So if that's the case, maybe able to trade down and get number one receiver, at 12 or 13. And I think he's really good. And he's a guy who I think has big playability, and definitely I think he's still scratching the surface of what he can do. He's going to get better. So that's a guy I'd be excited about if I could trade down and get McMillan from Arizona and kind of attack my number one need on offense.
well, Adam Schefter reported that Abdul Carter. I'm blanking. I'm just under the weather right now.
Abdul Carter. Abdul
Yeah.
Carter.
I'm under the weather.
Abdul Carter has a stress fracture in his foot.
Right.
So maybe that drops him in the draft a bit. But I mean, if he's healthy, he's no doubt one of the top players in this year's draft. But do you think the Raiders are in position to maybe, I guess, gamble on another player that might be hurt? I mean, Tyree Wilson had kind of a stress fracture thing going on with his foot when he was coming out. Like, would you guys take that chance? If he drops in the draft because of his foot?
I think it scared me a little bit, but that was 2 regimes ago at this point, so they're kind of gonna. I don't think they're really gonna have that in mind when it comes to that. Plus, they also just may think that injury or not, like Abdul Carter, just probably a much better prospect than Tyree Wilson was, even if he was healthy. But I have heard, I did hear a little chatter that if Abdul makes it past the Browns at number 2, which we'll see, I'm sure the Myles Garrett situation kind of factors into that, whether they trade him or not. If they keep him, they probably won't take him. But If he gets past the Browns at 2, there's probably a pretty good chance he's going to be there at 6 when the Raiders are on the clock. So, because the Giants, they're a quarterback team. The Jaguars already invested pretty heavily at defensive end between Josh Allen Hines and Trayvon Walker. And then the Patriots, he's not really their type of edge rusher, like they typically like the bigger guys, and he's more like, I mean, he's not, I wouldn't say he's a 3-4 edge rusher, but he's like he's more Malcolm Kuntz than he is like, one of those big bulky edge rusher guys. And so he could be there. And I think it'd be kind of an intriguing proposition to see that, even though they have obviously Max Crosby and maybe they bring back Malcolm Kuntz, Tyree Wilson's still going to be around. Like, do they take him anyway? You know, like you said, best player available is what they say. So we'll see.
Yeah. All right. Go ahead, Vic.
No, I got nothing. Let's take questions.
Okay. Let's get into questions.
Oh, one more thing.
Oh, sorry.
Salary cap did get set. That was probably another big thing this week, and it was higher than expected. So according to Over the Cap, the Raiders have $96.4 million in cap space. So they have a lot of money thrown around free agency.
Yeah. I think the wise thing would be to re-sign some of these defensive free agents. We talked about this. I mean, Kuntz, I think you want to bring back. I think you have to bring back Morik. I just don't think you should develop a guy like that and let him leave in free agency. If they do bring in some of those key defensive starters back, I mean, are they still left with a lot of cap space? You would think.
I mean, it could be. I think the only guy who's going to have like a super significant contract would probably be Trayvon Merrick in terms of the total value of it. And even then, like if they give him a big signing bonus, they could lower the year one cap hit. And so, it kind of depends. Like, if Malcolm Kuntz if that's a 1-year contract, obviously that takes more of your cap space down. So it kind of just depends how they structure it. But they have a lot of cap space. And then if they extend Max Crosby, that'll create more cap space. So I figure they should be able to re-sign like the core guys and still be able to make maybe 1 or 2 big splashes in free agency.
Yeah, I think Kuntz is a big question mark. You talk to people who are experts in this stuff and the people around the league. There's still a lot of disparity about if they think they get a big deal or not a big deal. So I think people don't really know what the other team's interest will be in Malcolm Kuntz because he had a little flash a couple of years ago, 8 sacks, but last year he was hurt. Missed all of the last year, but still young. So again, I don't know what kind of deal Malcolm wants. If he wants maybe like a prove it deal, that could be one option, kind of and get back on the market next year, or if he wants to like a little more security. But these are things we'll find out based on how many teams are knocking on his door.
Got it. All right, let's get into fan questions. Jorge Meza donated $2 and asks, Raiders, please don't sign Sam Darnold. I mean, it depends on the price. I'll say that. I don't think I'd be comfortable with Sam Darnold for 40 mil plus, but if you could convince him to come to the Raiders for like 35, I don't know. I don't know what the market's going to be. The cap's up, maybe 40 mil is considered a pretty reasonable deal nowadays. But yeah, I mean, if you could get him to come for a deal that doesn't commit you in the future for too long, he's probably the best veteran stopgap available.
I mean, he's better than the guys on the roster now, right? He's a lot better than the guys on the roster now. I would think it'll cost a lot less than you were going to pay Matt Stafford. So I agree. He's a question mark. I mean, those 2 games were kind of disastrous, but he was really good before that. But then again, it might have been the coach, it might have been the system, might have been the receivers he had. So it's roll the dice, and I think it's one they don't want to do, the Raiders, ideally. But yeah, again, you have to look at the price tag, look at what the other options are, and go from there. So I do think he'll be available. I do think he'll hit the market, and we'll see how many teams are really in the bidding, because like we talked about the draft guys, and if someone signs Aaron Rodgers in the next few weeks, that could be done before that. So we'll see who's left that needs a quarterback badly, and how much they want to pay Sam Darnold.
All right, question for Tashan. Tashan, what happens when the Jets jump from 7 to 5 if Sanders or Cam falls by Foxdale 642?
Well, it's specific for me, but then you don't get your quarterback, I guess. But I think in Vic and I's mock draft, the last one we traded up to 4 to draft Sanders, and people kind of ask us why would you do that? Because something like that is possible. You know, a team could try to leapfrog the Raiders at 6 and get their guy if, let's say, the Jaguars at 5 don't really feel like they love any of the players available, and so I don't think the cost to get from like 6 to 4 would be that crazy. So I think if the Raiders, by the time the draft gets here, you know, if it's Ward or Sanders, whoever it is that's available at 4 and they really want them, like I would do it. Why not? Trade him and get your guy.
All right, next question from Jack Kenna is here is very tough, but real possibility Mason Graham or Shadir Sanders at 6. Who would everyone want?
Well, I would probably go with Sanders. I just think, I mean, and again, it's all based on their evaluation, but I do think there's a pretty big gap between the top 2 quarterbacks still. I think we talked about maybe there's a big gap between Ward and Sanders, but still the top 2 guys to me are clearly there's a higher chance they succeed than the guys after that. So I think if you are saying, and Tom Brady knows Sanders well, it was his NIL guy. They've been worked out together in the past. They've trained together, so he'll have a really good sense of what he thinks. The upside is there. But if you are again even thinking about it, and you are thinking he might be a guy who can be a top quarterback, then you got to do it. I think you looked at last year. Everyone was ripping Bo Nix pick, myself included. I thought it was a bad pick, but they roll the dice, and you have to because if you don't do it, you don't get a guy. You don't get a guy who has a chance to be that guy. So I think if you're the Raiders and you're in that spot, then you got to take the risk and hope that your reports are good and Tom Brady's intel is good and that Shadur can develop into a good starting quarterback. So I think based on that, you got to take him at 6.
Yeah, I'd be grabbing perfect timing myself. I think Graham could be a really good player, but I do think the Raiders' defensive line, with Christian Wilkins being in the middle, Max Crosby on the edge, maybe Malcolm Koonce if they bring him back. Like I think the defensive line is pretty. It could be pretty good if everybody's healthy, just like it wasn't at the end of 2023. And so, but the quarterback need is just. And I know they're not drafting for need, but I'm higher on Sanders, much higher than Ted is. Like I think he's going to be a good starter. So
Yeah,
especially if you don't have to trade up and he's there at 6, like I would pull
yeah.
the trigger.
And I'm somewhere in the middle between you guys. I'm not as high on him as Tashan is, but I like him. I think he definitely is an intriguing prospect. I think he gets a hard time, but I definitely like him a lot more than Ted does.
Yeah, like I mentioned, I'm struggling with Sanders in the first round right now. But let's say the dream scenario would be Abdul Carter falls to 6 and you pick up a elite
That
defensive
wasn't the
lineman.
question. Read the question again. The question is Mason
Yeah,
Graham or
that's a
Shadur
fuck.
See what
Sanders?
everyone wants, and see that includes everyone in the draft. Yeah,
All right.
I'll say my evaluation of Sanders is incomplete for now.
We can't wait. We're holding our breath.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Next.
Raiders Resistance asks, "What's good, fellas? Do you feel like there are better chances of bringing either Russ or Fields rather than Darnold?
Yes.
Definitely less expensive."
Yeah, I think the chances are better. Like I said earlier, I just don't think the Raiders are really trying to spend that much money on a non-Stafford quarterback this offseason. And obviously Russ, has ties to Pete Carroll. Whether those ties are good or bad, I guess it's up for debate for certain people, but they do seem to be in a good place now based on what they're both saying. And they don't really have any reason to lie, going into free agency about it. So I'll take them for their word. I do wonder like what the Russ market will be like if he is another 1 year deal or has he played well enough to get, I don't know, like a Gardner Minshew deal from last year or something like that. Kind of interested to see. I think either way, I think that's a fine price to pay for a guy who was like an okay quarterback last year for spurts. I think Fields is probably a little bit more intriguing to me just because he's a younger guy who theoretically could still get better. I don't know how old he is. I think he's 24 or 25 or something like that. He does have a lot of kind of untapped potential between having a big arm and having a lot of athleticism. And he looked okay last year in 6 games. I mean, they were 4-2. He probably had his worst game as a Steeler against the Raiders. He was spraying it all over the place in terms of his accuracy and stuff like that. But if it's like a 1 year prove it deal, I think it's fine taking a swing on Justin Fields, and he kind of fits the type of quarterback. Me and Ted wrote about this a couple weeks ago. Like Chip Kelly's offense works best when he has a mobile quarterback. and it doesn't get too much more mobile than Justin Fields. And so I think that's an intriguing dice roll, and that feels more likely than them say spending, I don't know, 35 million a year on Sam Darnold.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a chance to get a pretty good deal here because I think the market's going to close out pretty quickly. Like a couple guys I talked to this week about the Steelers said that they think the plan is they're going to offer both those guys the same deal, like both Russell and Justin Fields, the same offer, and pretty privately. And it won't be like a competitive thing, but like the first guy takes the offer is the guy they're going to sign. So they're not really stating a preference. They're going to like. So I think based on that, one of those guys will be gone. The other guy will probably be left, wanting to get, a team and not really having a lot of leverage. I think like once Rodgers and Darnold and one of those guys goes, and teams are looking to draft guys up high, and it's not going to be a huge demand for either Russell Wilson or Fields based on that. So I think there is a chance to get a good deal, which would definitely be more attractive than, like you said, giving Sam Darnold, $35 million.
Yeah, and I mean, you can say what you want about Justin Fields' arm, and it's definitely questionable. I mean, his ability to throw on a consistent basis, but his ability on the floor definitely, his ability on the ground definitely gives the offense a floor. We saw that with the Bears. I mean, there were times where the offense was very explosive because teams just couldn't contain him in the QB run game. And at times during his Steelers tenure last year, he was starting to look really good and showing some big improvements as well. So, yeah, and like we mentioned, Chip Kelly's offense works best when he has a running quarterback. I mean, he wants to run quarterback power in short yardage situations. He wants to get into his QB counter run game and all that stuff. And Justin Fields gives you the ability to do that. So I see him as a possibility, and maybe there is still some untapped potential there. He's that second, third class of quarterback free agents with Russ and Fields is probably a little bit more realistic. Like you mentioned, I don't think they're going to want to drop the bank for Sam Darnold, and they do want to bring in a veteran, so it seems like a pretty realistic option. But yeah, that's all we have for you guys today. Thank you for joining us on the Just Win podcast. We're going to let Tashan Reed and Vic Tafur get back out to those combine wilds and get into fights at Starbucks and that sort of deal.
It wasn't really a
That on
fight.
us for,
It was such a weak thing. Like the one guy pretty much said, "Hey man, don't talk shit about me." The other guy said, "Well, who get on my face?" And he called security. So that's not a fight. What kind of fight is that?
Yeah. Also, shout outs to Dan Quinn. I know we gave him a lot of shit last week, and I got the backwards hat on for him today, man.
That's for Dan Quinn. The hat. Oh,
yeah,
that's
man.
beautiful.
Yeah, man. It's backwards for him, man. Shouts to Dan Quinn.
All right, Dan Quinn. Shout out to you. Good job getting Jane Daniels. Shout out. Just kidding. He's a good guy. Good dude. But yeah, we got one more day here, so we're gonna kick some more ass and kiss some babies and all that stuff.
All right, y'all.
All right, guys.
Peace.
Later.
Peace.
Adios.